Suffering with corrosion, which has been going on for years underneath the seam sealer. Potentiometers, new arms, and look how nicely these articulate. Here's the start of another Redish Motorsport Underside Restoration this time. Not just an RACP repair and reinforcement process like the majority of them are. This one is going to be a full underside restoration. All OEM colours, right from the rear of the car to the front, and it's a very special car actually. Real treat for us here because it's in velvet blue, which is that wonderful purple style colour. So it's an individual spec with champagne leather interior, and it's a 2006 model SMG transmission convertible, and it's travelled only 54,000 miles, so quite a rare thing in 2021. But it's even though it's only travelled so few miles and it's been on the road a little bit less than some M3 models, being it an 06, it's still suffering with the typical problems of chassis corrosion. It doesn't seem to escape any car. It just gets everywhere. The underside of the cars aren't that well protected, and after many years on the road, all sorts of corrosion builds up on components, whether it be just tin backing plates, steel control arms, wishbones, as in trailing arms, differential, subframe. It's really gets everywhere. So plenty of things for us to be doing. It's going to be a nut and bolt restoration, including all of the underside, which is mainly the main amount of work that goes into the job, is taking care, neutralising, solving corrosion problems, whether they be relatively minor like this on the chassis legs and on the transmission tunnel side brackets. All this needs attending to. Nothing can be overpainted, has to be dug out, possibly even fabrication work carried out if these areas are too badly affected, like these brackets. No way we'll be using those. We'll be going for the new Redish Motorsport rear and front fuel tank strap brackets, and the same with these brake pipe brackets as well. When you look at how much corrosion is present behind here, those will need to be coming off and being replaced. Lots of work to do on the chassis itself for corrosion, and then obviously the axle in piece by piece will be stripped down. All the old bushes, ball joints, wheel bearings will be pressed out, and then every item will be media blasted and then powder coated in the customer's colour choice, which is an OEM finish. So it'll be blacks and silvers. The exhaust is going to be plasma coated as well, and there's going to be new heat shields, new plastics, and it will be our typical Redish E-coat finish underneath the car to mimic the factory E-coat colour. All hardware will be replaced, nuts and bolts zinc coated as well. So this is the start of the process, just documenting what it looks like, where the problems lie. Corrosion wise we've had a look at already, and RACP wise we've had a brief inspection before we've taken this apart. There are no typical hairline cracks on the left, but because it's built after October 2004, it has the later style RACP, which has the plastic system inside here, which seems to stop the left hand sides cracking so much. Sometimes you do still find cracks on the right hand side, which we'll find out later once we get this car apart. It's had a few bits of things done over the years by the looks of it. Recent shock absorbers, and some brake pipes have just been replaced, and then they've been coated in a sticky black wax, which isn't really our style. It's nasty stuff to work with, gets all over your hands and spreads everywhere once you start working with that area. So they're likely to be changed for the BMW steel ones, and then they'll be hard waxed so that they don't corrode again. Other than that, it's relatively original back here, so we're looking forward to getting this one stripped down and start the process now. Here's just one good example as we're starting to undo the V-brace. V-brace is replaceable, that's not the end of the world. Chassis corrosion is a problem. Look at the stain in here where this where the jacking sort of pad area, and we call this the V-brace mounting box, is just suffering with corrosion, which has been going on for years underneath this seam sealer. And originally the seam sealer, when it was undisturbed just a few seconds ago, it looked relatively good and stable, but the staining colour of corrosion bleeding through the seam sealer is a telltale sign that this is in a poor condition. And obviously that's the metal of the chassis, which isn't easy to save or solve, and the longer that goes on, the more problems will be present. So these are examples of a 2006 vehicle with just 54,000 miles on it, and the corrosion is already quite inset into certain areas of the chassis, and I'm sure we're going to find more as well as we go into the jacking point area. Here's the jacking point area. You can see it's already blistering because it's a bit bigger, larger. The seam sealer wasn't very stable. And then we've got other cracks, which are all here, which are all going to need to be dug out, protected, and in really serious cases, sometimes the ends of the seals need replacing if the corrosion is deep enough in between the 3 layers. You've got the inner seal here, the outer seal, which is part of the quarter panel, and then you've got the internal floor pan, which matches just up here. So it's a 3-layer sandwich, and the longer this corrosion goes on and grows into the car, the more chance there is that things are going to have to be cut out in later life if we don't stop it now, for example. So we're getting the exhaust ready for stripping apart into individual pieces so it can go away for blasting and then coating. And as with most cars, the rear exhaust clamps are broken. These are in really good order. You don't often see them still straight, non-cracked and looking quite good, but then it has done only 54,000 and it's a 06 plate. However, the bottom one is cracked. As you can see, the corrosion's been in there for a long time, so that one is going to want either replacing for the non-genuine style, or we might try and see, since there's only one, might see if we can get the new one, the one that you can buy, that one there, split it, put it over, weld it and try and make it look original. We'll decide on that, we're not sure yet. The common problem with the top plate, which is the heat shield plate for the drive shaft, there was one fixing visually missing, but actually those 2 were also loose, so only that one was holding on, and as soon as we tested it, that one finally let go. So all 4 studs there are broken and they need welding on before that can go out for blasting and coating. It's putting up quite a fight actually, but that's not unusual. I mean, most D46s, to be honest, have got some form of corrosion under them, and specifically on fixings and things like that. So we've got to remember this car is actually still 15 years old, and some of the oldest D46s out there, even M3s, are sort of nudging 20 years old at the moment. So lots of things get corroded and put up, like I say, a fight. Some things need to be heated up to release that threaded connection if it's all seized and corroded, much like this example here on the exhaust hangers on the back left, for example, where these studs and nuts have been corroded and probably not been off in the car's history. Some of them are not moving. Look how round that nut is, for example. The stud is this piece coming out of the chassis of the floor, and this is the nut, which is almost round now, where it's just bound together. That's an example of what it probably was look like. You can still see a little bit of hex shape on that nut, for example. And then here's one which has started coming undone, but it's gone rock solid, because what's happening is, even with wire wheeling and cleaning the corrosion off of the stud, it's got corrosion trapped inside, so it's dragging itself and resisting and changing the direction of the pitch of the thread, likely with corrosion coming through. And the more resistance that gives, the more harder you turn that sort of thing, the more likely it is the stud's going to snap out of the floor. So it's probably easier at this stage, like we've done, to take the center bolts out to release the exhaust. Now we've got better eyeballs and hand areas to work. We can bring a heat induction machine in to try and heat that female nut, try and break that connection, so then we can undo it and save the studs that are in the chassis. So that's just one example of certain areas that need specialist attention, very similar to some of the components that we've been taking off, like the rear axle, and disassembling that piece by piece. Now if you look at the underside of the chassis, it looks in very good order, which is true. There are obviously dirt areas and grease sections and some aftermarket spray where somebody's changed the brake pipes, but actually the chassis is quite bright in many locations, and it's quite good to see, specifically behind areas that have been covered with under trays or heat shielding. All these areas are great. They're going to clean up really easy. The areas that are harder to clean up are obviously the dirty areas that have got greases, dry dirt, and then you've got this nasty black sticky stuff, which I don't know why, but lots of people seem to, specifically MOT testers for some reason. No offense to any MOT testers out there, but it is a quick fix to cover the brake pipes in that sort of sticky glue, but never really helps anybody trying to restore the car later on. Certain brackets are struggling, like the nasty one on the battery box tray, never escapes. Bear in mind this is a 2006 E46 M3 with 54,000 miles on. Look on the other side, it's been protected by heat shields and under trays, and it looks brand new. You'd be happy if things came out like that all the way over the car. but it's not that simple. Areas that haven't been protected are absolutely covered in corrosion, and that's why this owner is wanting to get it sorted, quite rightly so, because it's putting up a fight with us just taking things apart, let alone any maintenance that needs to happen in the car's future. So getting on top of it and doing a restoration is certainly one amazing way to do things, tackle them all at once. Brake pipe brackets, fuel tank strap brackets. We're going to be replacing the trailing arm pockets, I think, on this one. We're going for the front fuel tank strap brackets with the new Redish Motorsport ones, taking care of all that nasty corrosion we find growing underneath the seam sealer, the dangerous section of corrosion, which is the growth underneath sealer where you can't see what's happening, and you've got to start picking it all apart to try and find out where the corrosion finishes, and hope it's just surface, and hope it hasn't gone underneath layers. That's an example of a panel layer, one that overlaps another one, and what you don't want is corrosion getting underneath those layers, because then it's hard to get to because you have to take panels apart. We'll have that here, I'm sure, where we've got a 3-layer connection. That's likely to be present, so that will need specialist work and treatments. Similar thing with the left hand side as well. Not so bad on this side, that bracket's okay, this one's horrible, and that will definitely be replaced. Same with the trailing arm pocket up in there, and the front fuel tank strap bracket. We'll see more of the corrosion once we degrease the car and get rid of all the loose dirt and things, but you can see this is seamed corrosion trapped underneath seams that's growing in there, for example. That needs to be dealt with. We're slowly going through the bits that we take off the car and separating them into pieces. So it's all the bushes and ball joints and wheel bearings, taking those apart. We've got the front subframe, the spare one that the owner supplied. So we've got the rear subframe separated. The trailing arms are just being separated at the moment. So many things connect and hang off the subframe, the rear trailing arms. Quite a lot in there. You've got the front control arm bushes. You've got the lower, this is upside down at the moment, so you've got the lower ball joint, you've got the upper ball joint, you've got the backing plate, you've got the hub, wheel bearing, spring clip, all the handbrake mechanism assembly, brake calipers, obviously discs, carrier, things like that. So loads of pieces in there as well. We've got the calipers are going off for refurb as well. The front upper rear control arms, bushes, only a pair of bushes, and those have been pressed out. Anti-roll bars, V-brace, rear anti-roll bar brackets, differential we're going to be overhauling as well, and the exhaust we're doing. So lots to get on with. Plastics we've been separating as well. They're going to be replaced, a lot of those, because they're scratched and scuffed and got tons of wax that's all over them. Prop shaft, we're going to check on that. Centre bearing seems a bit loose, so that'll probably be replaced. Drive shafts have already had some work, but we're going to see what needs doing, if anything, in there. V-brace is obviously going to be replaced. Fuel pipes, the stainless steel ones, they should clean up fine, never anything wrong with those. And all the heat shielding we're going to be replacing as well, the centre ones, the lower ones, and the ones that go up to the front control arm that go past the traditional routing, because we're going to be doing a complete underside restoration on this as well. So we're not just stopping centre bound, we're going into the front. So lots of things to get on with, and stage 1 is still underway. Lots more of the components have been taken off now of the underside of the M3. Previously we'd seen the strip down starting, and now as you can see, it's a very bare chassis underneath. We've got no fuel tank system, no fuel and filler neck system, no brake pipes, no rear axle, and going through to the centre of the car we've got no pipe work. Obviously the exhaust is off, one of the first early things. No prop shaft, heat shields. And then moving ourselves down to the front, because it included this underside restoration, a front complete underside restoration, we've had to remove all of the front items as well. So that's the cross member that goes underneath the engine. It's also the front wishbones, the steering tie rods, the steering rack, the knuckles, the struts, pretty much everything. We've got our special tools on there, which is what's supporting the engine at the moment. It's a replica of a very small subframe, which is what the engine mounting arms bolt through to, and they load their energy into the OEM bolt locations, which then go into the chassis legs. The fact that then that gives us a very narrow contact patch means we can get to the surface corrosion areas where normally a subframe fitted would hide a lot of that and wouldn't allow us to get into certain crevices. And if there is anything underneath these mounts, then obviously we need to support the engine for a brief amount of time whilst this comes off to tackle anything underneath there. But it gives us much more area to work and make sure that the job can be done to a very thorough standard. And you can see there's a lot of either dirt collection here or what we think might be excessive cavity waxing. This is not normally this concentrated with dirt, but because it's probably been waxed in this area before, for example, this is all quite a sticky area behind the wheel arch liner, which is wax, and then the dirt which is on the road and in the airflow is just sticking to that like a magnet. That's why that area is very dirty, so that needs a lot of scrubbing and cleaning and degreasing. Very similar with the left hand side as well. Not as much concentration of dirt. We'd expect to see some dirt, but there's excessive amounts there. Doesn't look to be a huge amount of corrosion in this area, which is always good news. Sometimes it builds up around these front control arm brackets where the reinforcement plates go in. You see there's a little bit here on one of the Presto cage clips, but mostly the seam sealer is intact, which is great news. Being a convertible, it's slightly different. It's got different seal sections, stronger seals. So we've got areas that on a convertible overlap. We've got the outer seal, which is overlapping and not seam sealed from the factory, which is odd, but that's how they all are. So normally we'd expect to see corrosion in areas that haven't got good seam sealer, but this car is looking good and hopefully won't need too much corrosion work. We can see it's been jacked up poorly before in the past because there's a seam sealer split just here. Somebody's obviously jacked it up in board of the jacking pad, which are the pads that stay present in all of the car's chassis, and it looks like somebody distorted the floor. Quite a common thing that we see sometimes for rush tyre installs. Not saying any tyre fitter has done it, it's just sometimes we see that sort of thing. So there's an issue there we're going to have to address and investigate to see if there's anything different. Probably should be similar to this side, where there's this side looking a little bit gapped as well. That might just be mud, or it might be deformation where a big pad, sometimes like huge trolley jack pads or long trolley jacks, might have touched that and caused a sort of a seam sealer split. So we need to look into that area. And eagle-eye viewers would have noticed that the engine is looking quite bare as well, because there's no exhaust manifold on there. So because it's a full underside restoration, and a very extensive one at that, that nowadays really needs to include the exhaust manifold. As the exhausts get a little bit older, they do get relatively corroded. It's only external corrosion, but we also do see some of them at the downpipe flange, which lives about here, two of them. One of the sides sometimes cracks all the way around, so we always like to take those off and give them a thorough inspection, and whilst they're off, they're obviously going to be plasma coated as well, very similar to the rear centre cats, the centre silencer and then the rear silencer. We want that to match. We don't want to see a corroded manifold under there, and that also gives us much better access to some of the engine oil leaks that we're seeing. We've got an oil leak coming down from the timing case, which is quite dirty, which has been going on for a while, and some fresh oil droplets there and there. So there's some things that are going to have to be looked into in that area and addressed whilst the car is apart. We're working our way through the degreasing process now. Dave has been working very tirelessly to remove lots of years worth of road grime and dirt, and also some additional wax products, some sort of Schultzy wax that's been placed on the car, especially on the brake pipe area. It was like this originally. This is an area that we've purposely left for the video to show what it looked like. In areas there was heavy concentration of wax, and that have obviously got airflow dirt stuck to it now, which is why it's all black, grubby, and it actually smudges. There's some marks there that when you just rub your finger, it just then starts smudging, but it doesn't actually come off. And so that's in a majority of the places around the brake pipes, for example. So what we're seeing here is relatively unusual, but this is staining of the seam sealer. So the OEM seam sealer is this colour here, and then all this is now being cleaned of the wax, and you can see there's some black sections there in the peaks and troughs of the, well, the troughs really, of the seam sealer, and little bits left here, stubborn pieces. But all of this brown area here is staining of whatever chemical was in that sort of Schultz that had gone over the brake pipes. It's affected, you can even see the outline of the brake pipe there, where it's still, where it stopped that hit in the back. It's affected the seam sealer and made it soft, and it's still bleeding some sort of wax or bitumen based chemical, which means it's in no way going to be able to be over painted, and a lot of this area is going to have to be either bare metalled or scuffed up to neutralize that area and get it back to stable seam sealer, which can be over painted. And we've got a similar thing going round the back here. All of this brown markings are the staining from the spray wax that was placed on the brake pipes, and it's again down this section as well. You always get an OEM section down here where the BMW factory wax the brake lines and the fuel lines, but not to this brown level. So there's a fair amount of areas we're going to have to be doing a bit more than we normally would. It's not a problem for us, we don't mind that at all. Some cars come in with certain amounts of corrosion that have to have more work, and others come in with other things that have more work, whether it be wax areas like this, or some cars comes in with in the floor panel where we need to work on them more, but we'll work on that. So we're still to do the arches out here. Just wanted to show you the difference. So that's what it looks like when the car comes in, the amount of dirt and road grime that's been present and building up for many years. Remember, this is a 2006 car with 54,000 miles on it, and then when we start going through the degrease process, we get that lovely e-coat finish showing here, then the seam sealer, and then obviously the bleeding effect here, which we need to go through. It also gives us more chance to look at the corrosion now a lot of the dirt is off. Now it's got quite strong corrosion on the brake pipe brackets, which are these ones, and the fuel tank brackets, and also the RACP here and here. Now this is where the fuel tank strap goes, sorry, not the fuel tank strap, the fuel tank, there's a buffer pad that stops the fuel tank touching the RACP. There's the right front mounting point of the RACP, and over the years, if that pad is migrated out or it's been missed or lost by somebody working on the car, the rubber, the plastic fuel tank rubs against the RACP, rubs the paint off, and then obviously causes a large risk of corrosion, which hasn't been going on for just a short amount of time. That's been going on for years there. We're getting a similar thing over here where the pad for the fuel tank has been missing and the fuel tank has been rubbing away. Then we've got fuel tank strap bracket here, which it looks quite good, and then we've got a really nasty brake pipe bracket there, and then also matched with quite violent corrosion on the front fuel tank brackets, especially this right hand side one. I've got no idea why the right hand side one seems to get a lot more than the left, but there we go, that's the sort of thing we're dealing with. We certainly won't be keeping that on the car, we'll be using the new Redish Motorsport ones. Then when you actually look closely, now the dirt is off, so we've taken the dirt off obviously in this area first, the rear and the sort of fuel tank area. We're still to do the underside. Look, that's what it looks like when it's not degreased. You can start to see a little bit of corrosion there, but you can't really assess the car properly until it's cleaned like this. And then when you do look in sort of closer joints and areas, you can see that there's corrosion breaking through seamed sections here. This is where the wiring loom comes through that grommet location. This is where the little boxes are for the brake pad and ABS sensor wiring to bolt to. We've got corrosion coming through on certain areas here, and in weird places like underneath the very front. This deal is classed as the RACP because that's all part of the RACP panel, even though it's a rear trailing arm pocket. Bits of corrosion under here which are unusual. It almost looks like BMW have missed some seam sealer there and possibly stone rash. I doubt it because there's plastic undertrays that cover this, but for whatever reason there's corrosion which has been growing on the metal, and the pockets are quite violently corroding as well. Luckily we're going to be changing these because there's enough corrosion that the metal would be affected and therefore have to be seriously thinned out to remove the corrosion, and at that point it then becomes weak, and there's certain areas that you struggle to get tooling up to because it's in the way, the seal section is in the way of bringing an angle tool in, and also it's hidden inside a pocket location. So what's likely to happen is these will be replaced for brand new ones. And then we've got more corrosion around the handbrake console area on the edges and where the handbrake cables come through, various bits of corrosion in certain areas. Some small bits on the spring turrets here, little bits here breaking off, possibly where a spring's been removed and installed badly and it's chipped the paint because there's no normal reason why it corrodes there. You do get sometimes cracks, quite often, in the seam sealer here when the spot welds break, but that's not that common in cars that don't have cracks on this side, which it doesn't, for example, and there are no immediate obvious signs of spot weld failure up in this area. There's movement possibly on one there, but no breakage of corrosion yet, but we'll discover that as we start degreasing, wire wheeling and removing areas. So no crack in this location here, which is excellent, but that's not uncommon to find no cracks in a later model on the left hand side because that's built in after October 2004, so it has the plastic brace which fills this void here and makes it a solid part, so the box section effect of this, less moves or less likely has a crack, because it's also bonded in, so it tries to stabilize that. It's a very, very clever design, and it stabilizes that. Sometimes then the energy moves to the right hand side, and these haven't got a plastic piece in the right hand side, and you sometimes see cracks there, but there's nothing yet at the moment, which is good. We've got lots of spot welds that have got signs of flex and movement, which will need assessing and drilling out possibly and replacing. And then when we go to the front hand sections, we've got the spot weld which the bush touches just there. That one has started to break. I think I can see a crack starting around the outside of it. At the moment it doesn't seem to be any cracks growing from there, but it will still need to be drilled out and replaced with a plug weld so that we can penetrate weld into the threaded platform inside and then puddle it around the thin RACP. And we got that one and that one which are moving, and we got two that seem stable just there. This is a hairline crack. Lots of people miss this, lots of other companies do, unfortunately, but that's just our knowledge over the years tells us that that there is a crack from there to there, so that will be cut out and removed. And the same with this little one up here as well. That is a crack just from there to there. We've got another 1, 2 that are flexing, so they'll need some work. That's about it for the underside update of the rear. Now we've had the degreasing go on in the very rear section. Like I say, some more areas to still do, the battery tray, the wheel arch areas, and then the underside sections, just to give you a difference to what looks like when the cars are new and they're not protected in the center section. This is how it comes from factory with no seam sealer, but they don't seem to get corrosion in these areas because of the excellent under trays and heat shield effects. Now just look at the difference on the left hand side. The left hand side is very, very rare to find corrosion down these seams sections of the chassis leg where it's bolted and spot welded to the floor pan, because BMW waxed this section to cover the brake pipe. So you always get good coverage of wax, which means corrosion can never really grow and moistures can't penetrate the area. Swap to the mirrored image on the right hand side where they never put any wax, and the chassis legs are now starting on the 46s to give worries really, because there's corrosion on the outside lips, which is easy to get to because we can get to that no problem, but what about the trapped section behind there? That little flange from there to there all the way down is where it's spot welded, so that's metal to metal contact, and behind there will be a corrosion growth. So we need to understand the risk on this car and decide if it needs further work or whether it can be surface removed and then heavily protected, and then later cavity wax fed out through the outsides to stop it corroding in future. So still some degreasing down the sides and also in the front sections as well, where this has been heavily waxed. So the waxing, you could argue in some areas, is a good idea because it can stop corrosion growing if it's applied sensibly. However, if the car is going in for some form of restoration and therefore needs paint and sealers, that cannot be applied on or anywhere near wax products, so the wax has to come off and be taken off. So we've got extra wax that's been placed on over the years in the front sections, which is why this is a lot dirtier than it is. So those areas need chemically scrubbing to remove that sort of wax, and we can get back to a bare standard then. So that's the 5 pieces of the exhaust system on the E46 M3. This is the rear silencer, the centre silencer, the front catalytic converters, and the pair of exhaust manifolds. Those have been taken off. You can see the tips have been disconnected. We've taken off the clamps. We've re-welded new studs there where they were broken. We've clamped we've got a transport clamp on the cats for transport, obviously, and we've stripped everything of rubber bushes, brackets, and the manifolds are taken off as well, so that these can go for specialist coating. Fast forward several days, and this is where we are. Majority of the back of the vehicle, so from the fuel tank area backwards, is now either bare metalled or scuffed, where we had stained seam sealer previously from somebody's sort of Schultzing efforts, and with that also comes a lot of corrosion removal and protection. So you can see that the rear arches have been scuffed, not needing to go quite back to bare metal, just to actually remove the waxy Schultz that had been applied in that area, and lots of other areas that have had corrosion taken off and are in a part state of preparation. So first of all, the battery box area, that's had that typical bracket taken off here. You can see how even underneath the bracket, the pitting effect where the corrosion had been eating the battery box tray, not just the bracket that we've removed, that's been going on, but it's actually still stable. It's not a lost cause. This battery tray is perfectly stable to reuse once this is neutralized. And then also 2 brackets up there have been taken off as well. And then we go to the RACP. Now remember, at the rear of the car we didn't have any cracks, which is very unusual but very good. So this is because of obviously the later model design with the plastic brace in here. It's a low mileage car and an 06 build date. So no cracks at the rear. Spot weld work, there's some to do on the rear, but the main bits, we're part way through working now on the RACP work, are the front sections. You can see areas here that we haven't yet bare metaled, just left them to show what's going on in this process. So we found small semicircle cracks just around the mounting points here, where the pins tip and move and like that twist, and that puts a small semicircle crack in there. So what we do is stop drill the ends of it and the center, and then we do an incision line between those two, and then that releases this piece by the cracked curve nature of this section here, which we simply then remove, and then we fill that area up with weld, which not only solves the crack problem but also allows us to penetrate weld into the threaded platform inside, which is the absolute point that you want to stabilize, and blend it over to the cavity, the RACP, this piece here. So that's again showing the cracked nature. That semicircle section round there is the crack. That's not a cut that we've made, that's the natural crack. So we'll just finish it off into that hole which dead ends it, remove that piece, and then do that repair process, also drilling out those affected spot welds. And then we'll move on to the Redish Motorsport reinforcement process, which actually is nowadays using the V3 plated repair though. So we've got a new plate kit which is called the V3s. They'll be going on to the underside, so 4 mounting points plus the 2 spacers. Also, we've been working on the bracketry as well. Redish Motorsport have got new brackets that we've released, which are for the brake pipe bracket section, one that goes there, and also the fuel tank bracket there, along with a pair there, and then also the forward fuel tank brackets, which are here in this area here. Because they suffer with terrible corrosion, you can see the areas here which were pitted, which slightly, some of them are, we're still having to slightly thin down the metal, but at a reasonable level so that it doesn't become weak. And then that corrosion here where the fuel tank was rubbing against, and you can see where it had pitted, where the corrosion was building up on the steel. So good clean steel is this stuff here, and then pitted area is where all those little black blobs are. We still need to carry on and go around the back. You can still see, look how much was there. That gives you an example of the difference between the 2 sections. And obviously you still need to go along this front edge as well, because there's corrosion on the MIG welds just here along that section. The spring turrets or perches, they've been done, removed the corrosion on both sides. We still have to carry out our welding process on the left hand side rear, so where we've marked up from that line to that line, that'll get a full weld all the way through to stabilise the RACP to the wheel arch panel and take some of the load off of the spot welds, because there's one broken one there we've circled that we still need to do. As for other corrosion parts, you can see there's some of the areas on the top of the RACP that have had to be bare metaled, where there was a huge amount of stain in this sort of thing. But remember, if you scroll back through the video, it's a lot worse than that, where there was a chemical that had been applied over the brake pipes, but it had eaten into the BMW seam sealer, which made it unstable to paint over, and therefore lots more of it has to come off than would normally be needed, because traditionally the BMW seam sealer is very stable. As long as it's not got corrosion in, around or under it, it can remain in place. Then it's into the wheel arches. So turrets have been done, and you can see in the air there where it's obviously still corroded, where it hasn't been neutralized with a chemical like Por 15 overnight, and then it picks back up with the corrosion color, whereas a lot of the areas have remained bare metal because they've been coated. At the end of every day we will coat sections in a chemical called Por 15 metal prep, which neutralizes the corrosion and makes it stay bare metal rather than any corrosion sort of growing or bleeding back through. It's only a haze and it will come off very quickly within a few minutes work, but that's an area giving you an example of what it's like. So then going into the fuel tank area, we've still got some work to do down this seam sealer removal here, but majority of the area is prepped. So that's the fuel tank section brackets off. These are the front fuel tank section brackets that go in this position here. They always suffer with corrosion, so they have to be removed. You can see the pitting effect here on the bulkhead So that will be again neutralised before we weld the new Redish Motorsport fuel tank brackets on. They'll be behind the contact patches and the 6 points of plug welded. They will be having a weld through primer both on the back of the brackets and the bulkhead. That's the same with all of the brackets that we'll re-weld on with new metal, along with the Redish V3 plates on the back of them. And then going further into it, the rear trailing arm pockets have been taken out and removed because they were suffering with corrosion. So that's a case of drilling out the spot welds, and there's one MIG weld to release. And then the new panels will be going in, and then they'll be obviously welded with plug welding processes and stitch welding, so they'll be arguably stronger, but also brand new metal, so it won't be corroded metal we'll be dealing with. Again, the contact patches will be coated with a weld through primer, and then later on through all of these grommet holes here and up here and here, we'll be doing cavity wax processes to make sure all the back of any new panels are protected with a special wax. And then lots of small little detail corrosion removal jobs in this area here. This is the V-brace mounting box area. There's where the V-brace goes into. There's the rear jacking pad and then the seal. And this is where the wiring loom comes through for the ABS sensor. And this is where the little box is where the plug sits in. So lots of little bits of corrosion in there. At the moment we're working on this face. We've still got to go underneath the car, which we'll talk about later on. Outside on the seals we'll be working in a section in there later on. We're just going to be working on a right hand side trailing arm pocket. This one also has been removed, and lots of interesting findings behind there. We sometimes find little bits of cavity wax, which are obviously doing nothing major because it's just more of a dribble rather than actually a spray on any of the internal components. But from this side you also get to see the corrosion that's building up on the inside of the wheel arch grommet. So even though we can take it out on this side, traditionally you wouldn't necessarily be able to get to this side because there's a trailing arm pocket in there, but up here you can see that there is corrosion that needs some work and removal. And the same with corrosion in these joints. There's an interesting amount of corrosion underneath the seam sealer up in this area, which needs to be explored and found, but the risk is the more obviously you go into it, the more paint it will damage, because this is obviously body colour paint. So that's just a necessity. Sometimes it has to happen. The same with the panel between this piece and this piece. There's some corrosion shining in there, so we'll need to do some scraping and understand how far that goes. All the seamed edges, anything that is exposed or knocked sealer or any risk of slight corrosion developing, they've been taken off because we'll be reapplying that sealer. That gives you an example of what the turrets were like. So there's just a nasty dark corrosion that needs removing, which is growing. And elsewhere in this area, we still need to go underneath the car in the central sections. We've just started exploring those areas. For example, this area here, the V-brace mounting box, is hugely affected with corrosion. Hopefully a lot of that is surface corrosion, but when it overlaps a panel, it won't just go on its surface, it will grow in between. So in between this inner seal here and then this outer section, or the convertible strengthening seal, that will be corrosion in there likely, so that MIG weld might need removing and then teasing open to dig out the corrosion and then shutting and re-welding. We'll see where we go once we've got the seam sealer removed to understand how much is in that area, but it's not nice to see, and it's a lot of the time it's hidden underneath the OEM seam sealer, much like this area here. These are areas we always tell people that there's a risk that there could be corrosion under. It's what we call the 25mm grommets in the central floor pan. There's one on each side, and they seem to corrode badly even though the corrosion isn't visible. It's hidden under the sealer. As soon as you take the seam sealer off, you find all these black pitting dots, which is corrosion that's been living and eating the metal, and some of it becomes so unstable that it's then not a circle, it's not round, and you can see the rust that's sort of on the other side of the panel inside the car, and that there, what I'm pushing, is the bottom of the carpet. So it needs to be dealt with, because otherwise it will just carry on growing. So there's two ways to do this. Either it will enlarge the circle, and rather than a 25mm grommet we might use something like a 35mm grommet, for example, if we can get a perfect circle by removing the affected metal. Or it might have to have fabrication and welding, but that adds more complications because it's obviously welding work inside the car as well as underneath. So that means front seats out, and then the rear carpet and the center console out, so that we can have a clean access to get inside the vehicle, remove the sound deadening pads which are on top of these floor pan areas, and then cut this section out fabricate a new piece, inset it, weld it from underneath, weld it from inside, paint and seal it. You know, by the time you've done 2 of those and to a nice effect into a restoration standard, you are looking at close to a day's worth of work. So it's definitely worth trying, first of all, seeing if it can be opened up to a slightly larger hole than it currently is, and then use a grommet exactly like BMW use. But that's exactly what's happening on this side. Not as bad, but we can see a little bit of black pitting, and just here is a hole that's just developed, even with delicate processes. So we need to go into that a little bit more. And then the underside section is still to be worked on. So we've just started coming into that area, as you can see by those grommets, but we've still got to go down the chassis legs and discover the corrosion present in the chassis leg and decide what to do with that, and also the transmission tunnel bracket and various other little parts across the car. So once we've got a little bit more carried out with the V3 reinforcement process, we'll post another update. So here's all the parts from the vehicle that we're going to be sending out for a specialist coating. We've got 3 main coating systems that we're going to be using on this car. We've got the traditional powder coating methods, which are going to be used on the hardware, and then we've got a specialist company called Zircotech, which are going to be coating the 5 pieces of the exhaust system in a zirconium sort of plasma sprayed heat specialist paint. And then also the nuts, bolts and fixings, which are all in that box there, are going off for zinc plating, so in a yellow sort of passivated colour. So 3 processes. Some of these components are original ones, like the trailing arms, the subframe, the rear upper arms, for example, things that are strong enough, and the front subframe still original, things that are strong enough and good enough to be reused. And some of them have been replaced for brand new BMW ones, like all the backing plates, the centre exhaust plates, the trailing arm pockets, the rear stoppers, the exhaust brackets, the small fixings that we've got here, which are all for the rear anti-roll bar system and the xenon level sensor system. All those are new BMW pieces that were too corroded previously to reuse. So we've got new ones of those, but because the BMW process or coating is okay, but it doesn't last very long, we can improve on that. So those are going away as well, and they're going to be coated on top of that. So that's laid out in roughly how it would be on the vehicle, so you get an idea of the amount of work that's going into this project, and it is going to be a true underside nut and bolt restoration. So we've just looked at all the parts laid out from an overhead view, and now we're going to have a look a little bit closer. In total, I've just counted 61 pieces of hardware here, which are going to be coated and protected far better than the factory line were able to. And that doesn't include the nuts and bolts fixing box, which includes a mixture of. These are all the old components that came off the vehicle, and the owner has supplied a huge selection of new ones as well. So we are going to be going through all this and making the best set, and the majority of them will be all new BMW parts that we'll be using fixing wise, much like these new pieces of hardware here, and then we're going to be coating these on top as well, so making sure that things are as good at resisting corrosion as they possibly can be. So here's all the parts we're sending for zinc plating. It's going to be finished in that yellow passivated colour, that nice sort of gold colour that screams quality and restoration, and be a great contrast against some of the coloured powder coated items like the blacks and the silvers, for example. Now, a lot of people think we're absolutely mad, because apart from those 2 rear hubs, everything else there is brand new, genuine BMW, which is some £413 worth, I think it was, when we worked it all out. Mainly nuts and bolts. I mean, things like these drive shaft bolts, they're over £10 each. And although those coatings are absolutely fine at the moment, there's nothing that's going to stop them from corroding. I mean, they can be waxed, and that will help, but it can obviously wash off over the years. So what we find is the best way to do that is improve on it, because there are many occasions when we've seen brand new or nearly new BMWs that have got extreme amounts of corrosion on the components. Like I'm going to put an example up here now in the top right of the screen, which shows an F80 M3 2015, so only 5 years old when we carried out this video, and look at the corrosion present on the components. And that's because the protection that BMW apply to their new products, which all come out with the hardware comes out with a black thin paint like this stuff here, and then some of the fixings are this sort of silver colour. It just isn't up to the job of lasting more than a few years, so we're going to make sure it lasts a lot longer than BMW's approach, and we're going to get all this zinc plated. So that's one stage there of the process to get everything up to scratch and make it as best as possible for the restoration. So you can see how detailed this restoration has become, much like our traditional restorations, and really the only sort of new things nowadays, I suppose, are the fact that we've got new Redish Motorsport brackets. So as well as the RACP plates, which were on our V3 that we've just released, we're now offering the brackets for the brake pipes here and the fuel tank straps there, and also further on down there as well. So more of the underside is in either a bare metal state or a prepared state, which means if it's original seam sealer that was stable enough to stay, then it's basically scuffed. And you'll see that there are some sort of surface corrosions that have tried creeping back over the weekend, even after using a POR 15 metal prep sort of colouring, so those will have to be gone over another time to make sure they're stable. Brake pipe brackets again are off and removed, and they'll have to have another pass because some of that, what was black pitting, is starting to come back because it's not had a paint on it for a few days over the weekend. It's had a metal prep chemical reaction on it, but it's gone like a traditional corrosion colour, like a burgundy colour, so it's trying to break through. And what we're looking at here is the preparation that Dave's carried out to make sure that the contact patches where the new brackets and the plates are going to be welded on are fully protected. That's a zinc weld through primer directly behind the V3 003 plate and the 002 and the 001 and the 002, sorry. So that's making sure that there's never any bare metal trapped behind the vehicle, and also directly behind the brackets as well. So again, the brake pipe bracket goes there, and these are the contact patches for the fuel tank brackets. Spring perches have taken care of, and the vent tube in the right hand side rear wheel arch, along with the rear turret up there as well. And then moving into the fuel tank area, you can see that up here, this is where the tray and arm pockets were living, and they've been taken out, and the corrosion that was trapped behind there on this part of the front edge of the RACP has been taken care of, and now is in a zinc weld through primer, ready for the new plates, the new pockets to go on, the new BMW parts. And then some odd corrosion that we found in this position here has been taken care of, and some other areas up in the fuel tank area. So we've got V-brace mounting box point just here, and then the seal is actually in quite good order, as we do find on Convertible, because they've got the strengthening piece in between the inner seal and then the outer seal. So that seems to make the jacking pads more stable. So as you can see, the jacking pads are out of their position at the moment. We've just got it on a small rubber block. That allows us to get behind and make sure there's no corrosion there, which there wasn't on the majority of it, just a small part here. And because the strength is in the convertible seals, they don't seem to buckle, which means then the outer panel here doesn't open and allow corrosion to grow, so that's a good thing. So there's a small amount of corrosion where we didn't have to peel the panels apart, which is good, and then taking out other parts of corrosion and going down to a bare metal state. And you can see, like I keep saying, some of them over the weekend have tried to come back and corrode, so that's fine. That tells us there's a heavier part of corrosion there that we need to go over again, and also give another neutralizing chemical. Going through here, this is where the sort of fuel tank brackets are going to be welded. That's where the one of them is, and then we've had to dig out some of the corrosion in this seamed section up here as well. So another light pass on those little bits there that are starting to go brown. A lot of this area here is in good order, as you can see. Not really much corrosion going on up in that top section of the fuel tank area, which is great news. And then going over to the left hand side, very similar sort of story, where we had lots of little minor bits of corrosion trying to grow in little corners and crevices that have taken quite a lot of work to get out, because they're hard angles to access with tools, but we've managed it. We've got it into a bare state. And the same with the pocket area over there, for example. So not a great amount more, just a very light bit of prep work over these hazy areas again. First thing on this Monday morning. But we're going to move on to the welding process now and get the RACP plates, reinforcement plates on, and on the 6 brackets and the rear train arm pockets. Then going on underneath the vehicle, a lot more work has been carried on underneath here as well. So in this area up here, we had quite a lot of staining, not just from the original BMW wax that they apply over the brake pipes and fuel pipes, but whoever last changed the brake pipes put a lot of sticky black, sort of Schultz type bitumen based chemical over it, and it had actually eaten in and stained the seam sealer, so that wasn't stable to be able to paint over, whereas the majority of seam sealers are. So that area's had to be scuffed even heavier, and in certain cases there's little bare metal patches, but that's mainly on the tunnel supporting brackets. Most of the left hand side was in good order. We got right hand side corrosion as we normally find on the 46s on the chassis leg end there, and on the transmission tunnel supporting bracket just on the underside section. So the underside is obviously degreased, and this is now what we'd call a scuffed effect. This is basically keying the underside up, ready for some primers. Now on the bare metal, once this haze has been taken off again and then it's had a chemical treatment, then it'll have a etch primer on the bare metal, and then it'll have a high build primer over the etch primer and over the BMW seam sealer, and then it will have later on the sprayable seam sealer process, and then the top coat colouring, which is going to be an OEM e-coat. So you can see where we did have corrosion under here, because again it's trying to haze again, even though we chemically treated that. So it tells you there's a bit of corrosion present. There's an area there that we haven't actually got to yet. In the back we need to design, I can't even get a little finger in there, so we need to design or make some sort of file tool to try and get in there, an angled file to try and take that effect off. We have in the past cut these chassis legs off here and drilled out the spot welds there and that side, and actually removed them completely to tackle them. This one 50-50 on it. It doesn't seem to be in as worse a state as we've seen some of them that have had to be cut. We've even cut these off in the past. Transmission tunnel supporting brackets. You follow the line and you can see there's an end of a panel and then it returns back that way. Well, we've done cuts on these before to actually remove them and then take care of corrosion that's trapped underneath. A lot of this is surface corrosion, so we're going to give it another pass and then take a decision whether it's going to be cut or whether it's going to stay in position and be treated. The gearbox is obviously still in the car, and we've got our special tool support here which is holding the gearbox and therefore the engine in its natural position, and that allows us to get to the sections here which are underneath these. This is where the gearbox crossmember mounts there and there, and if you keep that crossmember in position then obviously you won't get to the areas underneath. So we put this sport tool on, so then you've only got a very small contact patch to contend with later on. So moving towards the front of the car, we can see that obviously lots more is stripped down and lots of cabling and fuel pipes are cable tied up out of the way. The underside of the seal area here has been checked and we're happy with all these seal lines. That's brilliant. There's no corrosion on these edges of the seals, which is perfect. And then moving into the front area, there was a lot of extra additional non-genuine wax applied in this area, so it has taken longer than normal, because normal, if it was just BMW seam sealer that was dirty, we would just degrease that, and as long as it was stable it can then be over sealed. But all these areas were covered with non-genuine wax, which attacked the seam sealer and softened it, which made it unstable to be able to paint on. So we've had to not bare metal but scuff these areas up, and in certain areas we've had to scuff them heavier. The bare metal area here on the chassis leg, and this part here which is sort of the leading front lower part of the turret area. So it's heavily stripped at the front. If we stand back and look from underneath, you can see we've got the engine in position, sort of looks like it's just floating there. We've not got a red engine leveler bridge on the top. We don't use that style of things. We made many years ago our own supporting brackets, so they pick up on the original chassis mounting points. They're actually made from an original subframe, so it's even got the conical or tapered locating pegs, so we know that they're loaded correctly, and then they just simply load out to the supporting arms. There's no rubber mount, so it's solid mounted at the moment, but that just holds the engine in position without putting stress on the top of the inner wing rails, or having to have the bonnet open unnecessarily for any longer than needed. And then it gives us the most smallest contact patch we can make around the 4 mounting points on the chassis leg where the original subframe would be, so that we can get around the back of it, because normally the subframe is so large you can't get to the sheeted metal areas where they join, because sometimes there are corrosions in that area. So all the chassis leg coming up through the bulkhead area back here and then protruding towards the front of the vehicle have been attacked and taken care of, loose corrosion removed, and back to bare metal in certain areas. And that's also the same on the right hand side as well. you can see that all the components are off, so there's obviously no suspension. That came off quite some time ago. After the full degreasing process and masking of the vehicle, then it's back to the scuffing, the preparation and the bare metaling in certain areas, because you sometimes get corrosion building up underneath these areas here in these little sections, as well as the front edge. The BMW didn't really seem to seam seal this very much, which is a shame, because it then opened to serious amounts of corrosion in the future. But the majority of the seam sealer rack here is in good order. It doesn't seem to be corroding, or the edges of the panels, the overlapping areas are good, even though it's in the firing line of water. But because there's a wheel arch liner, it just simply doesn't get to this area. Compare those join lines there to some of the underside join lines, and where there's corrosion getting in, you can see that plastic arch liners and coverings do their job of keeping the water away. So that's a walk round of the vehicle in its current position, showing what we're working with, where we are in the process. And now going back to the vehicle at the rear, we're going to get on with the welding process. Here's the back of all the panels that we're going to be using: the Redish Motorsport V3 RACP plate kit, the fuel tank strap brackets for the rear, also the front ones, the brake pipe brackets, and then also the rear tray and arm pockets. They're all coated with a zinc weld through primer, so the contact patches will never have bare metal, and that will allow us to give a good corrosion sort of warranty guarantee with this, and knowing that it will be protected behind the seams as well as on top of the things later on once it's sealed. And then we'll also finish off with cavity waxing to make sure that any areas like the tops of these will be covered with excellent wax protection, so no corrosion is likely to form. We're getting to a really exciting part of the underside restoration now, as new paints and sealers are soon to be applied to the underside to give it its better, fresh and more protective finish. So all the corrosion and fabrication work has been completed over the last couple of weeks. Lots of individual small corrosion removal processes that we've gone through on the previous video updates, and now that the reinforcement work is done as well. So we've got the Redish V3 reinforcement plates, left front, right rear, and the left rear as well, along with the two spacer plates, and then obviously the Redish brackets as well for the fuel tank straps there, the brake pipes, and then the other fuel tank strap there and there, and then there's the other two on the other side as well. Rear tray and arm pockets are in as well, so they're plugged weld, stitch welded, and they've already had a slight seam sealer approach round the sides, just to help build up and make sure that the seamed edges were protected before we go and spray the seam sealer into that area as well. So it's lots of new brackets, and as you can remember back to the areas that were corroded in here, all that's been removed. Like I say, they've already had an etch primer over the underside, bare metal areas, and then a brushed in seam sealer effect on some of those areas where we've had to remove significant amounts of original BMW seam sealer. And the reason why we do that is basically just to build the thickness back up. So some of the original seam sealer is so thick that when you remove some of it and then spray up into an area close to it, you will see a rise or a change when it goes from bare metal to seam over the BMW seam sealer. So in certain areas, and especially where we've done any bracket changes, we will always do a brush system first, just to try and give it some bulk, and therefore the levels won't be too dissimilar once it's painted or sealed, because at the end of the day we want to make it look as original as possible once it's finished. So just looking around from the back now, and you can see with certain torches, it gives you an idea if there's areas there that needs a little bit more primer. And we're just looking at the backs of the handbrake consoles and the new brackets to show there's absolutely no corrosion anywhere. The rear turrets, the joined in effect here where we've done the stitch welding all through the rear axle carrier panel to the wheel arch panel process. And if we actually step back, you can see now how much of the vehicle has to be obviously masked, just as if it was being painted an external paint, a body shop, where the underside would probably be protected. Now ours is obviously the opposite way, because we have to protect all of the over the top of the vehicle and the lifts and things, because we're painting the underneath of the vehicle. So we've got jacking pads areas, rear seal sections, going down the seals, which are all in great order. You can see the underside of the panel of the stamped presses here, and the floor pan is still so noticeable Now we've got the light on so you can see the shadow and the highlight. So that shows you how good the underside of the metal is. There were just certain areas that were just suffering with some localized corrosion that obviously needed to be attended to. We never paint the inside of the arches. If you're wondering why that's not got any primer on it, well, that's a quality control process just to make sure that the initial batch of top coat colouring, which goes on top of the seam sealer, is in fact the original, as close as original to the BMW e-coat. That's why we leave a strip of it there, and that just gives us chance to always keep on checking our quality of our colour mixes, for example, because this car is going to the e-coat finish, the original underside, which is that sort of yellowy olive green sort of hue to it. So going into the right hand side arch, similar sort of effect where obviously the arches are masked, the battery box section's masked, all down the sides of the vehicles are masked, and the lifting platforms. The jacking pads are out, so we've got the most amount of contact of paint underneath. And then going down the right hand side as well, we can see that in this case we've finished our work with the corrosion removal on that chassis leg, for example. And once that is seam sealed, nothing is going to be able to get in there. And once we've done our internal cavity wax from the ends and all the holes where it spreads out through these fluted sort of castellations, then there's going to be full protection and we're never going to see anything growing in that region again. Now if we stand back and look at the central section, you can see now the tunnel heat insulation, sound insulation has just been unbolted and kept in position on the gearbox, but just pinched together and taped to bring itself so that we can get the paint around the back, so that when we put that sound insulation back on, you've got a nice solid contrast from the underside colour to then the black sound insulation. The gearbox special tool is there holding the gearbox in position, and therefore the engine in situ as well. And then when we go forward, we can see all the engine is fully protected, masked up. They've done a lot of masking on this car, hours and hours worth of it, intricate masking around the front sections to make sure that there are no problems. And then we get a very good blend. So going out into the left front arch, if we're standing in the left front corner looking towards the car, got obviously the bumper, continuation of the protection and the masking, and then that gearbox section going in through to the engine to the front bumper area just leaves us with the internal front area. So we've got the wheel arch area, the turrets, the chassis legs, all these things that had to be, if we think back to weeks ago when it came in, when it was very heavily dirty around these areas, lots of additional non-genuine wax that all had to be scrubbed off. And it's come a long way. The corrosion removal on certain of the brackets, on the brake pipes and around the inner sections, around the these items here, which are the anti-roll bar brackets, for example. Our special tool there allows us to get to most of these areas with where the subframe previously that used to fit there would never allow you to get access to. And we're going to be going right out into the arches, including these box sections here. Even though that's all protected and hidden behind the wheel arch liners, it still needs to be taken care of. Right up into the engine bay. So the exhaust manifolds are off this car because they are being coated, ceramic coated. So that's given us even more access to be able to make our continue areas here that wouldn't normally be able to get access for cars or customers that don't want the exhaust systems carried out or the manifolds taken off. You can't get to this area, but because all the manifolds are out of the way, you can go all the way through the chassis leg area and get some really good coverage up into those areas. So when you are viewing the car fully painted and reassembled from the underside, it's hard to tell where the paint finishes, and that's the idea of it. We want to be able to hide the paint lines as best as possible, much like a body shop painter would be doing if they were trying to blend in something on the outside of the wing, for example. You'd want to hide the paint lines because you don't really want anybody to see where you start and stop. So that's why this is part of the heat insulation for the bulkhead as well. It's been unbolted and just pulled back and taped out of the way so that we can get the paint behind there. So when that goes up against it, it's going to be a great contrast, for example. And then finally out into the right hand side wheel arch, very similar to the left hand side, nothing much different, all protected, and corrosion removal neutralized and painted in etch primer first and then a high build primer. So that's the full underside of the car protected from the rear, the center and the front. This is what constitutes to a full underside restoration in our opinion. Underside restoration, I will emphasize, it's not outer body paint. We're not a body shop, we don't deal with the outer paint, but we certainly do take care of all of the underside as much as possible. So next stage is moving on to the sprayable seam sealer process. Well, we've reached a really exciting stage in the underside restoration. One of the most enjoyable parts of the vehicle is now approaching, which is the rebuild stage with very clean components and obviously a perfectly stunning underside. There is no dirt remaining now on everything that's going to be going back onto the car. It's either new or refurbished, and this is the final effect of the protection stage. So this has had the sprayable seam sealer and then also the top coat colouring, which is what we coin it as Redish E-coat, but it's basically our version of BMW's electrophoretic colouring, and that gives us that underside sort of olive green sort of hue, which is a little bit odd to look at, but it absolutely works. It's an OEM sort of colour standard, and once obviously the components are fitted up, you don't really see so much of the colours, but if you did look under there and you knew how a car was finished, you'd be quite pleased, we believe, in the qualities of the match of the OEM finish. Now in the arches, there was normally some overspray from the factory. This car was probably been no different, but it was hard to see because there was obviously quite a lot of non-genuine dark black wax in these areas, so it was hard to see what overspray was present. But as normal on our restorations, we always do try to do a bit of overspray. It's not been done yet, so this is how it's originally finished, and then we'll see if we can go over with the velvet blue overspray to see if there's any improvements we can make in the arches, all four of them for example. So let's look at the start at the back of the vehicle and show the battery box area, this area where it had the corroded bracket up here, two up there which weren't corroded, but just look at the blend-in factor. The OEM seam sealer, which we've gone over, which is always stable enough, is this area here. Now, this is our texture, which is just flows perfectly. It blends in, there's no harsh join lines, it's just an area that is really well protected. And when you actually stand and admire the car in good detail and even zoom in and look at the corners, things that nobody would ever see normally because there's a heat shield connecting onto it, but we don't ignore them or leave them untouched. It's every area gets worked on, whether it be corrosion removal, paint protection or seam sealers, and then that obviously leads the quality throughout the vehicle, not just at the rear. So we've got the V3 plates at the back, we've got the right rear here, which you can see the outline of the reinforcement plate, and then the studs were all in great order on this car. They didn't need replacing. We've got the left rear here. These are our newly created holes. We've been doing them for years, but we create these holes. Compared to the BMW, some of them holes are still present on the vehicle, which we use for cavity waxing and then later on plug up. Now these holes are for allowing us to get good cavity wax into areas that normally wouldn't able to be accessed from BMW. So then let's look at the front sections. So we've got the left front reinforcement plate, the brackets for the fuel tank, the brackets for the brake pipe, obviously gone out into the arch section, which at the moment is still currently masked. So once we untape that, there'll be a lovely contrast of body colour paint to internal underside E-coat, for example. And then we've got the handbrake console carrier area there, the right hand side brackets. And then you might wonder what these are. This is our special tool, which is basically an old rear trailing arm cradle that we've cut down, and we put on everybody's car that we are doing special seam sealer processes on to make sure that the seam sealer doesn't get to the contact points, which is where the trailing arm cradle is going to go up later when we rebuild it. So we'll take this special tool off. That will give us an underside area which hasn't got a compressible seam sealer, and that will be manually painted in the same colour but a thin wet paint effect. So those are what those special tools are there. And then going down into the corners and the crevices of areas that are still masked up. So if you're wondering what that is it overspray? No, that's masking tape, where we've had to mask the circles because we don't want any paint going inside the vehicle, for example. These are the new Redish Motorsport fuel tank strap brackets, which are identical to the OEM ones that we've taken off before. And again, an area here which is masked up so we don't get any paint inside the vehicle. Those are the underside sections. Now previously we had to dig out quite a lot of seam sealer from this joint here, where the floor pan meets the sort of rear bulkhead area, and this has been carefully filled again before the sprayable approach. So once we've got a sprayable finish, it just looks an original process. And what I always like to do is show that it's a fully cured solid system, so we can see that rubbing that doesn't cause any effect, nothing comes off on my hand. It's completely safe to wash underside of the vehicles that have been restored by Redish Motorsport, and therefore they're very easy to protect for years to come, because absolutely nobody goes into this effort and this sort of cost restoring a vehicle if they're not really interested in maintaining it. Most people want to be able to keep them in a good, clean order. So then going forward to the centre of the vehicle, stand back and show you the amazing highlights that we're seeing from the natural daylight coming in through the workshop, picking up on some of these really flat sections where you can see there's absolutely no dents or deformations to the floor panel. It's totally original, but you can still see the pressings and the contours of what that panel was like when it started life, before it was put into this vehicle at the BMW body shop effect area. And there is no more horrible black sticky wax that was running all down this passenger side, all the way up around the brake pipe area and over the rear axle carry panel. Obviously that all had to be removed because it would have affected or compromised the finished effect of the underside repair. And this underside view is always one that I'm really liking, just because there's so many different shapes and angles of the underside of the car, and these stamped pressings that really stand out on a quality underside restoration, where you can touch them, you can move your hand around them, you can clean them, whether it be with cloths or a hose, and you can just make sure that the car is being a lightish colour underneath. You can always make sure the car is in a healthy, good order. It's easy to keep control of something when it's like this for many years to come. So the chassis leg has turned out excellently. We're really pleased with the process. And like I say, with the final cavity wax, which we'll be doing in the next phase, which will be litres and litres of cavity wax injected all through the box sections. It doesn't have to be a box shape, it can be any irregular shape, but it's basically a hidden section that we can't get to. That will allow full protection during the contact points area. It's just in here that we've talked about in the previous style. So then obviously the gearbox still in the car as the engine was on the last visit. There was no difference in that area there, but this is just showing the sort of gentle blend up behind those sound pads, for example. And like I mentioned previously, we don't actually paint the inside of the tunnel, but that just gives us a quality control check and allows us to look at the original colours. So here's our seam sealer finish just about here, where it naturally fades out, and that's the original BMW colour there. And you'll be hard pressed to see the difference in colour. So that absolutely is spot on and gives us confirmation that our colour matching game is still strong, so to speak. So the underside section leading towards the near side front, this is the area here where we'd sort of get a wheel arch liner up to that stud there. So all of this would be covered normally in the vehicle. Nobody would get to see it, nor the internal sections of the wheel arch area, but still everything gets coated. It's a full protection process on a full underside restoration, and we're so pleased when customers do bring us a vehicle to be done into this level, because we really thoroughly enjoy doing them. And like I say, going forward now, this rebuild process is one of the most interesting and exciting bits about the whole thing, because it's when we get to bring people's dreams alive and make sure that they are having what they desire, which is a fully restored car at the end of the day, for the underside arguably. And again, if you're wondering what these are, there are special tools. It's a special aluminium plate that goes over the threads for the front, you might call them front arm rear bushes or lollipop sections, and that's because not only do we want to protect the threads, but it's mainly the contact patch where the front control arm wishbone bracket goes. If you don't do that, then there are risks of seam sealer is compressible, and what you don't want to do is crush something into the seam sealer when you tighten it up and put it onto the vehicle, because all that will do is crack any potential seam sealer, and we don't want that. So it all needs to be stable. And then I was talking previously about the special tools that we created to remove the need for the original subframe to be there. And because the manifolds are off in this position, you get so much more coverage all the way up past the wheel, the anti-roll bar brackets, and again even into the corners, areas here that you just won't see or need to know about. Look at that, how it rolls off in that really interesting radius, so there's never any sort of corners really for water to sit on in the future. That's a look at the right hand side front, which is almost a mirrored image of the left hand side. There's no real differences. Brake pipes are still present and they're masked up, and once this is, well, it is fully cured, but we always like to leave it overnight, which is what we're going to be doing now. And then tomorrow we'll be moving on to the cavity wax stage and starting to demask the vehicle, which is exciting because then we start seeing the colour contrast, the outside colour, which in this case is a really nice rare individual velvet blue, which is that sort of purple-ish metallic colour. So standing back from a distance, let's look at it from another angle and show that we've got the engine still in, the gearbox still in. You can just see the front bumper and the wheel arch there, and then moving towards the middle of the vehicle and then towards the rear of the vehicle just down there. So it's about as stripped as you could get, apart from taking the engine and gearbox out. There really is nothing else you could take off the underside of this car. And that gives you the details and confidence that there's no stone left unturned, and you are really getting an underside restoration to such a strong level. Now we're moving on to the cavity wax process, really important stage. We've got 500mm wands, so that gets us well past the center point of the RACP. So when we do our injection, it goes past the halfway point, as you can see it running out there, cleaning the cavities as well as protecting them with wax. And then when we go onto our other side, the right hand side, and inject that 500mm wand past the halfway point like we're doing now, you then get a crossover effect. So you can guarantee that you've managed to get all of the internal cavities filled with wax. And that's because the natural process of welding reinforcement plates or anything welding repair on any vehicle by any repairer in the world is going to burn off any e-coat protection. So you have to protect that again, and cavity wax is the preferred method. It's a system that the factory install and do at the factory, but just not very much of it. So we make sure we do lots of that sort of thing. Now we go on to the left front mounting point, going through the factory 20mm grommet holes here. Again, the long white tube is 1/2 metre long, so you can get well past the centre line of the cars, and that's where you manage to get the crossover, so you can guarantee you've got everything. And it's a 360 degrees fan head, so you really do cover the entire internal section. Some of the intermediate jobs, whilst we're waiting for the final paints and things and sealers to fully cure, and the cavity waxes and things like that, starting to clean up items that are going to be put back onto the vehicle, ones that aren't being replaced and are just being either cleaned or refurbished. In this instance, the fuel tank is going back onto the vehicle because there's never anything wrong with the fuel tanks, the plastic tanks. Sometimes they have scratches underneath, but they're always in good order. They're plastic, so they don't rot away, but they always do harbour a lot of dirt and mud and things like that, especially up on the top section. This is completely hidden when it's in the vehicle, and it seems to be, I don't know why, but they always get muddy and gross, and some of that will touch the underside of the painted floor. These are the contact pad patches where it gets pushed tight up against the underside of the vehicle. There should be another 2 here. You can see where that one's missing. That was why it was rubbing against the underside of the RACP, which caused that rust contact patch there. There's one present there, it's migrated, it should be in that angle, which had allowed this area to be touching the RACP, which is why it had rusted, and there's the rust imprint to prove it. And the rest of it is just really grubby, nasty dirt, which is ingrained in all of these sort of convoluted tubes, which are the fuel pipe breather valve systems. So we'll be doing our best to scrub all of this out and get this as clean and as dry and back to pure plastic, possibly with a protection coating. We'll get that as done, so when we put it back into the car, we're putting things back in that are totally clean and are going to really enhance the underside of this vehicle. We've now got the powder coated items back from the powder coating company, so it's laid out in the order of the vehicle. So we're stood at the back of the vehicle. We've got the rear axle here, it's the subframe, or its professional name is the diff carrier. We've got the rear anti-roll bar, the upper spring arms, the rear trailing arms left and right, also with the trailing arm cradles. Backing plates, now those might look like the new BMW ones, and they were genuine new BMW ones, but we sent those for powder coating like we probably explained in the pre-powder coat video. So even though they were thin black paint from BMW and it looked okay, that's too thin, it doesn't last very long, so we have them powder coated on top. So then we've got the rear stoppers, or the subframe rear washers, they're in black. Rear anti-roll bar links, they've been done in powder coated silver. Then we've got the front push rod in black. We've got the left-hand side metal fuel filter under tray in black, along with the new exhaust plates. Again, they come with a really thin, as with all BMW panels, they come black and thin paint black. So we have them powder coated. Fuel tank straps are in silver, and as is the gearbox cross member. And then moving towards the front, we've got the front reinforcement under tray, which is in silver, and then the front subframe in black, the kingpins in black, and also the front backing plates, which again are genuine BMW, but we've made sure that those have been painted and powder coated so that they are as strong and as thick as they possibly can be. So looking a little bit closer, you won't really see much difference, but it's now a thicker paint because it's powder coat compared to the original BMW finish, which was just a really small, thin dip-in process on the black. So we've got subframe over here, which come out excellently. Really pleased with this front aluminium undertray. Looks very good, very similar to the original aluminium finish, but that is a powder coat colour that we use to replicate the aluminium finish. So very, very pleased with that. Kingpins have come out great. All the masking is excellent, as we'd expect. No masking. The masking has been stopping the powder coat go onto the contact patch for the wheel bearing, also on the thread and on the rear piece where the dust cover is pressed on. Also in the tube, in the threads, contact parts for the brake calipers, as well as the steering knuckle and behind the back, the front wishbone, and then the threads for the backing plate. They've all been professionally masked. Lots of effort in the preparation stage before you go ahead and do the blasting and then the powder coating. Gearbox cross members come out very well. Looks excellent. When you look in all the small little gaps and reinforcement parts, it's all fully coated and looking wonderful. There isn't a great amount more to show really. The rest of it is all being either zinc plated or refurbished for new. So we've got some other brackets that we're still waiting for, which are being done in a zinc yellow finish, which are some of the brackets for the Xenon drop link level system, front and rear brackets for that. The small little pieces that are all sort of almost too small to powder coat, those are being protected above and beyond the original BMW finish that they come with from factory. Even though we start with new BMW products for those small items, they're coated again on top. And then the exhaust system, which is a 5-piece system, 3 exhaust pieces and 2 manifolds, those are being professionally coated Zerkatech, so those won't be too long and they'll be back here, and then we'll be able to get those installed as well. So the next stage is to start fitting all these up with bushes. So we've got subframe bushes to go in the subframe, the diff bush that goes in the front of there. The trailing arm has front bushes, ball joints top and bottom, wheel bearing, backing plate, wheel hub, then the handbrake shoe system and mechanism assembly, then the brake discs, pads, calipers, lots of things to be done, and we're really looking forward to carrying on with this project now. We're just starting to go through our batch of nuts and bolts and fixings that have come back from the platers. So that's a zinc plating process. So we're going to lie these out and just check them and maybe even do some comparisons, old versus new. Hundreds of fixings and brackets have come back now, and we've laid them all out. So these are zinc plated with that sort of yellow passivated colour, which is fairly often seen on restored vehicles, and also sometimes straight from BMW. But however, most of the time BMW's components all come with either silver on their fixings or black, and it doesn't last very long. So as you remember, in this video series we showed all the new bolts that this owner had purchased. All these are new components that were purchased, and rather than just install them on the car, we've then sent them for zinc plating to make sure that they are stronger in their terms of protection coverage than the original BMW items. So here it is laid out: bolts, nuts, fixings, brackets. We've got things from subframe bolts, rear trailing arm bolts, brake pipe and fuel pipe brackets. There are more of those, but we've just started fitting the brake pipes, so we've had to use them already. Anti-roll bar brackets, reinforcement plate brackets, ABS reluctor rings, exhaust clamp kit, a front wheel bearing, dust guards, the rear exhaust rubber mount brackets, flexi brackets for the trailing arm and for the front struts, all the Xenon bracket hardware, brake clips, nuts, all the drive shaft special bolts and the washers, anti-roll bar brackets, handbrake cable brackets, handbrake adjust and fixing assemblies and the pivots, as well as the shoes where the springs hold the shoes together, and then spring clips here and here, the springs that hold those in. So there is a multitude of components. The majority of all are new, like I say, and we're really looking forward to starting reassembling the vehicle with all these nice new clean products. Here's some before and after examples, and also during, which we'll talk about on the handbrake system later. These are the V-brace mounting bolts, so you can see what they commonly come out like when they're the old rusty bolts, and then what a new coated bolt looks like. Then we've got the bolts here for the front reinforcement plate. Nice difference on those. Going along to the handbrake spring pin and springs. Then we've also got here the drive shaft bolts. Lovely difference those. I think those are my favourite bolts actually, looking at those. We've got the typical 668 nuts, the M12 by 1.5 lock nuts for the rear axle assembly. We've got the handbrake adjuster pivot mechanism. That's a 3-piece adjuster. All those have been split apart and individually coated. And then the drive shaft bolt reinforcement plates make a nice difference. And we've got a couple of items here that show some stages, different stages of the work, if you compare them to having old or slightly rusted bolts done. These are some that we sent, some second-hand bolts, rusty ones, that would have had rust on them, much like this, that we've had coated, but because the rust had pitted the metal of the bolt, you can see where the zinc really hasn't finished it in a really shiny, smooth, much like a new bolt. So this is a rusty bolt that's been coated, and yes, it does have some form of protection, but probably not as good as the new bolt, and obviously it's pitted, so it does dull down visually. Compare that to having a new bolt done, massive difference. Similar thing here with the anti-roll bar, rear anti-roll bar pivot bracket bolts that have been done, which are socket cap screws, M8 thread. Nice difference on those. You can see if you hadn't have had a new one done, you'd be relatively pleased when that one came back. It's coated, it's a zinc yellow colour, but it has got that typical pitting where the corrosion has already been eaten at the thread and the top. So it's more protected than going for the old rusty one, but not as good as having a new one plated, for example. And then the last one example, which is probably the most easiest to understand and visual, is the handbrake pivot mechanism, which are really always quite corroded, and normally are so seized at this joint here that you can't really rock them or move, but they should be able to rock and move like this, because this is where the handbrake cable pulls upon and then forces this edge and this edge to push the handbrake shoe towards the other one. So that's what they look like when they're rusty. Some are more worse than that as well. That's if you have a rusty one coated, which is protected and moves a lot freer, but it's still got that metal pitting, which you just can't get rid of. That's where corrosion has eaten the metal. But it is still an acceptable part to use to some degree if it was coated. However, the best process we're seeing is to have brand new ones coated, because there's a massive difference between having a rusty one coated and a brand new one. Where that metal was original, smooth and flat, it has remained that, and you've got all those different colours which show how good the metal clearly is. Now we've done the unmasking and looking in the wheel arches, we can see that the overspray, the body coloured overspray, which is velvet blue, has been applied before the suspension went in and the brake pipes and the little wiring boxes went on. We've done that as one of the first things, pretty much as part of the final stages of paint colouring and during the waxing process. So we've got a sort of an overspray process in the front arches, sort of replicating what we see on E46s, so we can see that is present there. Wheel arch liners are still yet to go in, and then working our way down the centre line, you can see that the gearbox cross member is now installed, and also the bracket. These both have been powder coated, so that's for the gearbox under tray support, and this is the one for the back of the gearbox. The transmission tunnel, let's put some lights on. Transmission tunnel side heat shielding system, or the sound insulation, has now been unmasked and put back towards the outside edges, as has some of the components underneath the car. So we've got new fuel filter fitted, cleaned up the brace. We've got new zinced bolts for everywhere that we're working on, like the gearbox mounts. Also the fixing points for the gearbox, for the brake pipe brackets, those have been zinced as well, and new plastic sections in there. You can see some of the cavity waxing that's still present inside. That's where we've filled the cavities and the chassis legs with wax. Lots of cavity waxing's gone on through this car, but now not all of it needs to be cleaned off. We do clean off what we don't want visible, because sometimes it will look a little bit odd if you see sort of like dribble lines coming out, so we do clean that off. Even though the factory left them, in a underside restoration like this, you want them to be as clean and as tidy looking as possible. Whereas some locations it's okay, like up here where the fuel tank's going to go, that doesn't matter, that's going to be fully covered and it shows that it's been done. So again, looking down the chassis leg on the right hand side, you can see the wax that's in there present and looking really smart and finished. A little bit of body overspray colour coming in from the underside before the side skirts were fitted, and those have been fitted now, so that's why you can only see a little bit of that. Going back to the pipe section, so the fuel pipes, they're stainless steel, they come up perfectly, so we're able to reuse those but clean them. And the brake pipes, they've been renewed for genuine BMW ones, going through, following the parallel lines, that's the fuel vent line there, and then going up around the tank section onto the left hand side to supply the left rear circuit. Now these are the new Redish Motorsport brackets, so there's one there that comes out perfectly in the middle, and then we've got the fuel tank brackets here, and then that's the other Redish Motorsport ones there as well. And then they go over the axle, OEM join location, and then go across the top of the axle to supply the right rear brake flexi flicks in bracket, which is that one there as well. That leads us on to the wheel arches at the back, so you can see that we've got the body coloured overspray in the wheel arch, and some of the fuel side fixings have been going back in as well, the vapour boxes, the pipe work going down to the carbon canister, the rear shock absorbers and the top mounts, and also the first part of the new heat shield system has gone back on, which is the rear exhaust silencer heat shield. So many more new things to go back on. Obviously it's still quite a bare car if we look at it from an underside point of view. We've got the few pipes and fixings on. Some of the studs there, those are the two front ones hanging out of the RACP and connecting to the RACP reinforcement plates. Those are what are going to hold and stabilise the front of the rear subframe, and the other two are the ones that go in the back there. And then fuel tank's going to be one of the next things that goes in. New boxes, new plastic wiring, junction boxes have been installed as well, and all the grommets, BMW grommet locations everywhere where we found them, up behind the brake pipe sections as well, by the fuel tank brackets, some at the rear of the RACP, new spring pad rubbers. So as much as we can get brand new from BMW is being applied, unless it was extremely expensive and can be refurbished, like the powder coated items like the subframe, the trailing arms and things like that. So those are going to be coming into view shortly as we go on with the rebuild. But here we get to see things are starting to really look impressive on the 46 M3 underside restoration. We're starting to see some of the new fixings being installed, those zinc/yellow coated bolts, which are coming out of the subframe, or the RACP should I say, there and there, along with the brake pipe fixings. We looked at those earlier. Rear trailing arm bolts, obviously we still need to put those in. They're just giving you a representation of where they go and sort of the contrast they make. You can see the fuel tanks come up like brand new. The tops of the fuel tank, including all the fuel vapor pipes, have been extremely thoroughly cleaned and separated, and so is the underside of the fuel tank, along with having the tank straps installed. Those are powder coated, even though they are stainless steel. We've powder coated those to give the sort of impression of a sort of a stainless / grey, nice contrasting colour against the black tank itself. So they've got extra protection on them, and obviously the bolts and the rubbers and the sleeves have been installed that are going into the Redish Motorsport fuel tank brackets. And then we can see going down a bit further, nothing much more at the moment on the underside section. We are just preparing the axle assembly actually at the moment. So shock absorbers are in place. Axle itself is over here, which is on our jig, which is just being built up at the moment. We're just getting ready to put the differential in shortly. So we've got the subframe itself, which is obviously a powder coated item, which has also got a protective wax layer on top of that now before it goes back into the car, because the top section you never can get to. So that's why it's it's a little bit, it might look a little bit dull, and if we were to touch it, it would be a tiny little bit tacky because it's got a wax protection on there. Genuine BMW subframe bushes, and also the diff bush down here as well. New BMW handbrake cables. Then the upper arms are powder coated, the original ones, in a silver / aluminium sort of colour to represent that material. And then trailing arms have been powder coated as well. So we've got the OEM black finish, along with the rear trailing arm cradles, new front bushes, genuine BMW, along with the lower ball joints just down at the underside, and also the upper ones just up here as well. And then we've got the fixings, the OEM clipping points, which are all the plastics. We've cleaned the cabling systems up, and also the ABS sensors. And then we've got the backing plates fitted on, along with the handbrake console area there, that's where the cable comes out, zinced, along with the bolts. Zinc bolts, even though you're not going to see these, it's just nice to know they're extra protected with that yellow layer of zinc, along with the drive shaft flanges as well. Really impressed with those, as obviously they've got genuine BMW's wheel bearings inside those as well. And it's pretty much the same affair on the other side as well. So it's all looking fresh and new. When we look down from this angle, you can see you've got the brackets here for the brake flexi pipe, the lower camber bolts, and eccentric system is also all new, as are the lower bushes, the lower arms, even the special little lock tabs in there, and the nuts and the bolts coming through from this side are all zinced and fresh and protected. So that's the axle being prepared. We're just going to be putting the differential in soon, and then that whole axle assembly can go back up on our hydraulic jig system, which raises it up nice and gently. So so it's very straightforward to install. We build them on a frame, and that's how we take them out of the car as well. And then going down to the ground, just to show some layout of some new items that are going on next. We've just had the order of new plastics come in and arrive from BMW. I forget how many individual pieces there are in there. 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we're just missing one. The only one that had to come from Germany, which isn't in this picture, is the one for the carbon canister section, which is the long one at the back. So there will be a good 12 pieces of plastic, which are all new and fresh. It does add up to quite a considerable amount, even just plastics, but it makes a massive difference, because plastics do get, from factory, they get waxed on the left-hand side of the underside of the vehicle. So you always find the left-hand ones, especially on the gearbox one and the fuel filter one, and also the fuel tank one on the left. They're always got this heavy, nasty wax, which is extremely hard to break down, even with chemicals, without affecting the plastic. Plus, they have a huge amount of stone rash on them. If you think they've been going around for, say, 15 to 20 years on the road, and they've got an amount of stone chips and rash, which makes the plastic, rather than being smooth, it gives it sudden imperfections, which are shown, unfortunately, in like a grey colour for some reason. So you can always see when an old plastic has been used. And sometimes they clean up fine and people want to use the old ones, but in this case, the owner wanted all new plastic. So there they all laid out. We're going to be installing those very shortly. Just to, if you weren't aware of what they are, that's the front engine under tray. That's the two lower front wheel arch liners. That's the main front wheel arch liners. Then we've got the gearbox under tray, the fuel filter under tray, the left and right fuel tank under trays, specific for the M3 because they've got the cutout there for the V-brace. And then we've got a left and a right rear wheel arch liner. And like I say, the only one that's missing is the carbon canister fuel bracket one. A few other pieces to go on once the axle's in. Then we've got the push rod, which is again powder coated, along with a new heat shield there. We've got the premium gold brake calipers, which have been overhauled, including the carriers, and have got new pads and new pistons and seals for the fluid and the dust. Anti-roll bar has been powder coated, so it's got new drop links on the ends, new rubbers and new brackets, which have also been powder coated. Then we've got the exhaust brackets or plates for the lower section. One is just a reinforcement plate and one is the actual middle rubbers for the exhaust center section. Those have been renewed for new, as has the front subframe being powder coated, so that's looking really fresh and original. So we're going to have a little look a bit closer, along with the engine mounts, and even buying the silly, well I say silly, but they're not, but the what most people think insignificant things, the heat shield for the right hand side one, where it's near the exhaust manifold heat. The old one was dented and dirty, so a new one, whilst they're still available to buy from BMW. Steering rack is original, being cleaned up. The tie rods are brand new, and you can see the bolts have been placed in to show you where they go, and also they're going to be a nice contrast to the black. And also the front xenon headlight level system, there's a new potentiometer in there, and also the bracket, and even the bolts, the small M5 bolts, they've been zinced as well. And then going over to the last few things, we've got genuine BMW lower front control arms, and also bushes and brackets, or the rear lollipops if you will. And then lastly, I think we've looked at this before, but the powder coated under tray, which again is done powder coat, but it's done in a special colour which we think mimics aluminium quite well. So we're really looking forward to carrying on with the rebuild and getting a lot of these components on. Once that rear axle's in, we'll be seeing a remarkable difference. And also going into this build is new drive shafts. The reason why I'm showing this is because we've just had part of an order. We just managed to get 10 drive shafts for the E46 M3. Now they've come back available. 8 have arrived today from UK stock, and 2 we've exhausted UK stock now, so 2 are having to come from Germany. So here are the new BMW drive shafts for the E46 M3. Now they've changed number and gone back into production, so those are going on to the car. That sets us up for the next few underside restorations we've got as well, along with some 4.1s as well. Not that it really is going into this vehicle, but whilst I'm up in the parts department, I might as well show the 5 4.1s that we've got as well for the next few diff builds. So lots of things going on to this car, and really can't wait to see these drive shafts shining away next to the rebuilt differential, and obviously the rest of the components on the rear axle. So every time we revisit the underside of this M3, I think it astonishes me every time, knowing that we've done them to probably this standard. I think every one we're slightly getting a tiny little bit better with certain coating techniques, and this one's going to be very special with the exhaust zirconium coated, but they still do bring huge enjoyment, not only for us working on them and being able to video them and provide them to the owner for lots of years of enjoyment, hopefully, by showing friends, family, and just looking back on what they developed, but also being able to hopefully show the world if this video gets released. We'll check with the owners first before that's the case, but like I say, it's such an enjoyable process when you stand back and look at the perfect finish that we're obviously very biased on, but that is happening along the vehicle. So we've got the brake systems on now. The axle's actually in, which is obviously where we last left off when I think the fuel tank had just gone in, but a fair amount's been done. The axle was last we saw it on the brace or the jig system, and it was just about to be fitted up with drive shafts and limited slip diff. So we've had a diff overhaul, so an OEM. This is what we call a stage 2 on our website. If you have a look on the diff build page on E46, we do 6 diff versions, and this one is an option 2, which is basically a full OEM rebuild, which is once all the guts and crown wheel and gear and the GKN LSD have been separated, the casing is then media blasted and then painted in black POR 15 rust preventive paint, so that it stands up to a lot of abuse compared to the BMW finish, which flaked off after a few years. And then the internal clutch systems are rebuilt with the new modified clutch systems, and then new rear cover plate, which gives you the bushes at the back and the front, obviously new hardware, bolts, nuts like that, crown wheel and pinion rebuilt with new seals, also with new bearings front and sides, and the crush washer preload set, and obviously it's then a fully built diff. Match that with the genuine BMW drive shafts, which we're really pleased about. They've just come back into circulation after being no longer available, which was a hell of a worry for any E46 M3 fanatic, whether it be a restorer or a DIYer. It was a horrible situation, but luckily after about a 4-month wait, they've reintroduced them under a new part number. We've now got them for sale on our website, just in case you want to grab a set to put in the garage or in the loft for any future plans for yourself. So that's finished it off nicely, matched up with the zinc plated hardware, which makes a great contrast against some of the blacks and even the silvers. So we've got the anti-roll bar, which is obviously powder coated with the brackets, new bushes, new drop links. The shock absorbers, the car had just come in to us having shocks fitted, which is excellent. So those were brand new, and we can never reuse those. New hardware for the handbrake system inside the drum or the brake disc assembly. New handbrake cables, the camber bushes or ball joints in the case of an M3, top and bottom, along with the zinc plated hardware. And it's not just being put in. Every time we install a fixing, whether it be a nut or a bolt, it does receive a nickel anti-seize paste or a grease system to make sure that that thread obviously engages very smoothly, but also fully coats the circumference of the threads and the internal diameters of the nuts, so that they ever need to be serviced again, they're always going to be able to come undone. They're not just going to seize up like BMW dry fitting everything on the production line and then just letting things rust and deal with it later. Their sort of attitude was. Whereas we're restoring vehicles, we want them to be serviceable if they ever need to be. We want the things to come undone. And that's just the internal sections, the bits you can't get to. So the bolts and the threads that are hidden, the actual heads of the bolts and the washers and the nuts that are exposed, we will put a wax system on them to give them further protection as well. So these brake calipers have been overhauled as well at the customer request to a premium gold colour, which is why they are that finish. We can also see, I don't think we're going with the old wheel bolts, I'll check on that, but they're just probably just in there at the moment. You can see that the hub nuts obviously been plated as well, and also this very nice piece, which is, you can't see most of it apart from the spigot or the hub centric piece, which is what the wheel sits and locates on, but behind the brake disc, that is the drive flange, which is inside a new wheel bearing, which is obviously protected by a dust guard and is fitted in the powder coated trailing arms. Those trailing arms go all the way through this towards the pocket location up here, and we're putting new under trays on as well, so that's why you can see those. We last looked at them on the floor actually, the plastics. Now some of them might be a little bit dusty, they've been in BMW's care, like you can see up there in transit, so we need to go over those areas and make sure we're putting them on as presented as possible. New heat shields at the rear and the heat shield fixing plates, new plastic guard here with the correct BMW fixings. We call those top hat fixings, they probably have got a special name, but that's the ones that they come with from factory, so that's the ones we install. And then going backwards a little bit, looking towards the rear of the car, we've got the push rod, the fixings for the prop shaft that have been zinced as well, the heat shield protection plate for the near side front bush, and the centre plate reinforcement, in heat shield plate we're starting to see with the right hand side fuel tank guard there. Wheel arch liners are being renewed as well, so we've got the right hand side one there, the side one will go on once the rear bumper is on. And then going towards the middle of the vehicle, not much to see or go on with in the middle because that's quite an empty area of the vehicle. We've looked at the brake pipes already and the heat shielding. This is a nice touch, the fuel filter area here, the fuel filter tray. Now we've just done some cleaning on the gearbox because the car's having an inspection too, so we're just doing the gearbox fluid change, and we had to clean off a bit of oil that was on there, which has splashed on the newly powder coated area, but look how easy it comes off. Well, that's just with a glove. I'm going to use a microfiber with some quick detailer, and that new powder coated heat shield for the fuel filter protection or a stone protection will come up like brand new again as well. We've gone on to replace the heat shields on the bulkhead. These are very hard to get to physically because normally the exhaust manifold is in the way. This one's for the actual bulkhead. This one's for the chassis leg / it's got a curve on it for the front control arm bush. There's one more coming from BMW Germany which goes across there, and the reason why we're doing that is because one, we love new heat shields. They look a great contrast against others. Sometimes heat shields corrode around the fixing points and get so large that then they give up and they start flapping and rattling, which we don't want. But secondly, because we've got the manifold still off, we've got perfect access. Normally you're struggling to get that area. We should be having the exhaust system back, I believe, tomorrow, so we're really excited to get that on and well, first of all video it, but secondly get that on the system, on the car, and see what a huge difference that's going to make. Going into the front section, we've got new wheel arch liners, main sections, and also the front corners as well. Front caliper setup, which is again the premium gold system. The hub nuts and the back shield plate and the cap have all been zinced as well, along with we powder coated these, as you remember, the new backing plate. So even though they were brand new and they had BMW black coat on, it's like water and always deteriorates within months, so we powder coat those. We powder coated the front kingpins as well, making sure not to get anything in the ball joint area or the contact faces where the calipers are fitting, because you absolutely have to have that contact perfectly. The struts were also brand new like the rears, so they didn't need replacing. They are still box fresh, if you will, so that's why they're up there looking smart as well. The anti-roll bar is positioned on, and also the drop links, the new ones are fitted, just cable tied out of the way so nobody hits their head at the moment. Even gone to the effort of zinking all the little brackets up here, the ones, they call them ISA brackets, but it's basically to hold the brake pad wires and the flexi hoses. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We're quite close to finish when you think about it. If you stand back and have a look, the rear of the car is pretty much assembled. We're just waiting for the exhaust system, and clearly we need to put the front I've lost my words, front subframe on and steering rag, and that's fully built on the ground at the moment, and the new wishbones. The reason why we're holding off on that is because the manifold is going to be so much easier to put in before we put that system on, and then we can connect up to the outboard kingpins, and we really are getting close to bring this car down off the lift and the enjoyable process of finishing up, which is wheel alignment, brake fluid, and then road testing. But we'll do another update once the exhaust comes in, and also once it's on the car to show the finished effect. Here's the exhaust for the E46 M3 that we're carrying out the restoration on at the moment. So it's been coated in a Performance 1 coating, volcanic black zirconium finish, basically, which is plasma sprayed applied by the company Zircotec. We are authorized dealers for Zircotec, as you may see on our website and their introductory news section. So as a reseller for that company, we're able to offer these not only to our restoration jobs that are being carried out, like this one here, but also as a separate purchasable part. So if it's something that people are wanting to do during their own refurbishments, they can have these taken care of by us. We are keeping a set of systems in stock, and especially 2 sets of manifolds, because the manifolds are absolutely incredible, and not only do they visually look good, they obviously have a performance benefit. The beauty of this, not only to clean up the exhaust and have it coated so it's visually enhanced for many years, but it's also to retain heat inside the exhaust system and pass it through the exhaust, rather than actually letting it radiate and emit into the engine bay. So arguably the engine bay temperatures are slightly reduced, and that does go up as you go through the range. Now this is the Performance 1 coating system, which is called Volcanic Black, which is a very good visual enhancer, and it can be done in several colours, and this one is sort of an OEM matte black finish, as we can see here on the shine, or the matte sort of sheen on top of the components where the light's coming in from that direction. We have to prepare the exhaust, so that's obviously where we separate them into individual pieces. The rear box, for example, has to have the tips taken off, and we'll polish those tips and also replace the BMW rivets at the point of reassembly. New brackets and rubbers will be used, as we'll see going through the process. But then the centre section, we have to obviously mask up for the sections where it's going to be clamped at the clamping points. We also have to weld on new bolts here, because they're always poor, the BMW ones, and then separate out the lambda probes from the cat section, take off the plates and the rubber mounts here, mask up the EGT section, mask up the front flange, disconnect the bracket system, that's also been coated as well, and then put a special tool system that holds the 2 pieces together, because as soon as you unbolt that bracket, the only things holding those 2 cat sections together are those BMW welded tabs. So we've got a special tool that holds those together so they don't twist. And then the manifolds, we've got 1 slip joint and 1 welded joint. That slip joint's been coated as well, and then it has to be masked where the contact faces and the seals are going to be. I think this is the most impressive bit, the bit that I like the most, the manifolds, only because there's so many different angles and shapes to the OEM manifold section. You can really get to see the intricacy of it, and how really impressive looking it is visually going to be. It's a shame you don't get to see a great amount of that. Once that's on the car, there's a big heat shield in the engine bay covering it, but at least the bottom sections are going to be visible, and where it's mated then to the downpipe, they're going to be noticeable from underneath the vehicle. So that's all now back with us. We've checked it out, and now we're just going to start assembling those items so that we can get them onto the vehicle shortly. front end of the vehicle is being worked on at the moment and being built up nicely. We already saw that the front struts and shock absorbers were already fitted, and the kingpins, which were looking fantastic. Brake assemblies are looking really smart, contrasting nicely against the powder coated black hubs or kingpins, and also the backing plates, for example. Since then, we can see that the anti-roll bar system is on, and also the front subframe. Now, that was able to go on after the manifolds. We were waiting for the manifolds to be installed so that we could then get the subframe on later on. So we've got the manifolds fitted, which look wonderful and are nicely curving their way down as per normal S54 manifolds, just coated. They're coming down, so new gaskets, new studs and new nuts, all from BMW up on the cylinder head where it comes out. You can just see another section of them up there. And then they're coming down to the centre section where it would meet the catalytic converters. So that's all in place. There was one more heat shield we decided to replace, which is up there. Normally we don't do that one. This one was looking very clean, but when we put the old one on versus the new ones, you can see the labels for the new ones on the bulkhead and the front control arm bush one there, it did show up. There was a heat distortion discoloration on the old one that would go across the chassis leg behind there. So that one's on its way from BMW, which is fine because that can go in after, that's no problem. And like I say, once the manifolds were fitted, then that allows us to carry on with the exhaust system, which will go down the vehicle shortly. But now the subframe is on, which again was powder coated. It was already a very good condition subframe, but having now fresh powder coat on top of that. The engine mounts looking great as well, with the zinced bolts, which give a nice contrast against the black. Steering rack was cleaned and was already in great condition. Pipes have just gone on, so we've got a bit of cleaning to do about some residual oil that's gone on there. New clamps for the steering gaiters, and the steering tie rods. The car came in with new tie rods on, so those have probably done very little mileage, so those were in great order and were able to go back on. Anti-roll bar was also, I think that had been recently renewed, and the new drop links are all fitted up, connecting the front central sections to the outboard pieces. So that's the left and the right and the central up there. We've got a few more things to do in the underside section, but we are getting very close now to then the wishbones going on, which is almost the last piece, connecting new BMW wishbones from the subframe to the outboard section, the kingpin, then to the front control arm bushes just there, which is why that heat shield from BMW is sculpted, so to make sure the exhaust heat doesn't interfere with the rubber from the bush. And then we'll be making our way underneath the vehicle. So one more heat shield we've got to put on in that place there. That's a brand new one that's already here with us from BMW. And then it'll be cat's centre section, and then the rear box at the end of the vehicle. So front end is looking more and more complete as we go forward and get near completion for this underside restoration. We're getting very close to the finished effect now. You can see the centre exhaust is on. We're just about to prepare the rear silencer. We've also got the V-brace on now that the centre section is on. You can see we've also been injecting that with cavity wax. It's a brand new BMW item supplied by the owner. So where they rust the most on the 46s is through these hollow sections on the V-brace. So we always make sure that we wax those. Everything BMW supplies completely dry, but we like to do our protection as we go along. That'll be on the fix-in threads and internals in hidden sections. So that's make sure that won't corrode again in the future. Now moving towards the middle section, we've got the underside of the reinforcement plates that hold the exhaust centre piece. So we've got two that have the centre rubber mounts, and that's got the nuts correct, along with the bolts as well. Then the other plate is just a reinforcement plate that matches the other one. We've got the centre join here. We're waiting for two clips from BMW. That's why we've got some yellow cable ties. They give us an identification marker that something's not finished in that area. So we've got two clips waiting for the heat shield. And then we've got the cat section, centre pipes with the bolts, the nuts, the gaskets. And then we've got the new plastics up here as well for the EGT and the Lambda probe wiring. EGT's in and fitted. And then going along to the centre section where the manifolds meet the front cats. We've got the polished front areas along with new BMW gaskets, new zinced hardware, nuts, and the Torx ASA bolts, as BMW call them. And all the heat shielding's in place now as well. So that's the final one up here, which covers the underside driver's footwell area. and then going up to the bulkhead one, the one for the front control arm bushes, and then the final one which goes across the chassis leg up there as well. So got some lambda probes to connect to send up into the engine bay, and then those will be connected up. But that's the underside of the exhaust almost complete. We'll be very shortly putting the rear silencer on and then showing the final effect. We've also got some of the front end items just being connected up. The underside, last time we saw it, the subframe was on, the steering rack was on, and now we've got the front wishbones on with the bushes as well. They'll be fitted up shortly to the chassis leg area, which is in there along with new hardware and bolts. And then it will be the minor and final things like the the reinforcement plates, and then the final plastic under trays next. The reassembly work is now finished on this velvet blue E46 M3 underside restoration to a concourse standard, better than factory original. And now we can go a bit closer and have a look at all these amazing applications, processes and refurbishing techniques which we've honed over the years, all come together and provide the owner with what is now like a nearly, if not better than new, drive-in vehicle. So there's three main reasons why we think these underside restorations are a benefit to the vehicle. There's one, the visual appearance, which is obviously, we're very biased, but absolutely stunning. So it's going to look like better than a new car for many years to come. Secondly, the drivability of the vehicle, now knowing that every single rubber component has been replaced, ball joints, bushes, then we've got drive shafts, differential overhauls, brake overhauls, all those things which do wear over the years are now renewed and like brand new again. So we're going to make that car feel factory fresh. And then you've also got the longevity benefits of this application, whether it be the powder coating processes, the Zerkotech exhaust coatings, or the actual chassis corrosion removal work, and then re-sealing applications and cavity waxing. All those things are going to make this car absolutely outlast many others out there. And we know this is not for everybody. This obviously is a big ticket item, this process. It's anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks worth of work, depending on how corroded the vehicles are. But we absolutely love doing them, and really pleased to be able to provide this owner with many years of happy motoring. So let's go and have a look a bit closer. I suppose first of all, look at the chassis and the overspray of the velvet blue on top of our E-coat, what we call the Redish E-coat seam sealer finish. Brackets removed up here and the two behind the heat shield. Make sure there's no corrosion traps any longer up there. We've got all new heat shielding. That's the rear main one for the rear silencer, the centre under tray, and then further on down the manifold ones, which we're going to have a look at a bit closer later on. Exhaust hardware, all new rubbers, and I should say every bracket and fixing that was supplied to us, we've been able to zinc coat them as well, as secondary or better coating process than we believe the factory original ones come. So not only does it give it a great contrast colour wise, but appears to be a much longer lasting system than the BMW silver and black finishes that come on some of these standard components. So it extends to new plastics as well. So here we've got the one for the carbon canister and the correct, what we call the top hat fixings, which are these sheet nut metal clips. We've got trailing arms which have been powder coated, and the backing plates as well. We don't just fit the new ones from BMW because the black coating, that cathodic paint, is very thin, so we powder coat those as well. The brake calipers have been overhauled. That isn't a zinc finish, even though they almost match the other fixings. That is a premium gold finish. The lower arms are brand new. The upper arms are powder coated in what we call titanium silver, so that mimics sort of an aluminium finish, but won't oxidize like the original ones do, or be a rough cast any longer. It's now nearly smoothed off. Brand new genuine BMW drive shafts. Now those are back in production again. Rear shock absorbers and springs were also new when the car came to us. They hadn't driven, I don't think, more than 100 miles, so those were perfect to be reused. New ball joints on the lower section, new plastic covers, and then the camber arm fixings, the eccentric bolts and the washers. Brackets as well for the flexi lines, new BMW flexi lines, Then the brake pipes as well, the metal pipes. This is the one supplying the right rear circuit, which is up in here. You can also see the Redish Motorsport new brackets up there for the fuel tank and the brake pipes as well. Then we've got the under trays for the fuel tank for the right hand side, the left hand side, the V-brace, the subframe or diff carrier, if you will, is actually powder coated as well. The differential's been overhauled as well, so that's new. Well, the case has been stripped apart to single components with the LSD, crown wheel and pinion taken out, media blasted and then painted as a bare unit, and then rebuilt with new bearings, new seals, new rear case cover which gets you the bushes at the back, new front bush that sits in the subframe, obviously new oil and filler and drain plugs, plus socket cap bolts around the outside. The differential LSD has been rebuilt as well, new clutches, drive shaft bolts and reinforcement plates, those are all in the zinc finish as well, even down to the most minor small bolts, however tiny they might be, the M6 bolts up there that hold those tiny brackets for the Xenon level system, and the M6 ones there, including the bracketry, new potentiometers, new arms, and look how nicely these articulate. I mean, these normally are completely seized and bent so much so that they come in to us completely in non-working condition, but those are fantastic. Anti-roll bar mounts up here have been powder coated, the anti-roll bar, the new mounts for the drop link, and then the pivot brackets are zinced as well. New fixing, new speed clip, let's get that right, new hose clips, and then also the fuel vent pipe and the filler pipe up there as well. Obviously anti-roll bar bushes and powder coated brackets as well, zinced hardware, all correct hardware as well. We don't go for anything non-genuine. We buy all these fixings, or if they've been supplied to us, like in this case where the owner supplied them all, they are all genuine BMW and correct. So these ones are the socket cap screw, the M8s for example. Subframe washers as well, those get powder coated, and then the bolts as well. You can see here, obviously before any of the reassembly work, you can see some of the chassis work that had to go on. We've got the Redish Motorsport V3 reinforcement plates, the underside plates here. So we've got a left rear and a right rear outline. A really nice light underside finish, similar to what would have left the factory with. We call it E-coat, but it's just a replica of the original BMW finishes that we see coming out from the transmission tunnel area, which is about the cleanest thing on the car. All the vent areas are all cleared out, so there's no cavity wax. There's cavity wax in there, but none blocking that section, nor is there any seam sealer blocking it up. That's a common mistake which some people make, and even BMW as well. Then we've got the centre exhaust section, which again is been done by Zerkotech, which we are a partner or distributor for. So that's looking fantastic. A heat resistant coating, which visually looks good and has a performance characteristic to it as well. So it retains the heat inside and passes it through the system rather than letting it emit heat. So the engine bay temperatures stay lower because we've got a manifold system done in that finish, which we'll see later on. It's very much similar to the right hand side. We've got all the same replicated on the left hand side. And then going down towards the centre section of the car, centre section heat shield, left hand side fuel tank sections, the under trays, the V-brace, mounting boxes which are all corroded before, have been treated and then painted and resealed. Also the aquaplane guards, trailing arm cable clips all new, the cabling is fantastic, the zinced bolts and the powder coated cradles up there as well. Then look how straight those brake pipes are. These are all genuine new BMW ones, which such an attention to detail we find is really key and something we love to do. They come from BMW. Sometimes they've got little bends in them, or they're over nearly 4 meters long. So they come sort of with a big curve on them to be able to get them in their delivery vans and cages. So we have to straighten these out and then replicate them to the BMW clip-in points that all go up in the correct location round the back of the fuel tank, and then come up on the left hand side just up there to supply the left hand side circuit, and then through the OEM joint section up there to then go across the axle and supply the right rear circuit. Fuel pipes, those were all excellent, stainless steel fuel pipes. We even zinc these fixings, so that's the attention to detail we've got. These are the very thin sheet pressed fixings. We buy those from BMW and then send them for zinking so they all match, and we've got that nice yellow passivated colour on them, which again contrasts against the black powder coated exhaust centre plates. So the fixings, new rubbers in the centre as well, and then centre fixings again a BMW, and the cats are looking fantastic, and the heat shields of the cats, again that's the same finish underneath, the performance black coating. Heat shielding on the left hand side as well, going towards the downpipe fixing area, and then standing back you can see the under tray for the gearbox and the fuel filter, and then the front edge of the wheel arch under tray broken up by the contrasting aluminium front plate, which again is powder coated in titanium silver to mimic a sort of a aluminium finish, with those wonderful zinced bolts giving a great contrast again. And then going towards the front of the car, front under trays, which are the center under tray, and then the lower wheel arch liner sections here as well. Now the car came in with a new anti-roll bar on the front, so that was brand new, that was able to be reused, and new tie rods. So we've then carried on that process with powder coating the front kingpins or hubs, if you will, and also brand new backing plates. We powder coat those as well, just like the rears. The rears are too thin for us, so we get those ones powder coated, zinking even the small little ISA brackets up there, the cleaning of the pipes and any cables that have to be reused, the cavity waxing of all through the internal sections of the wheel arch area. Previously, if you watched all of the video, you would have seen that the engine was supported on a very specialist support arm process we keep, so we can take the cross member off, not only to powder coat that's the powder coated one, but then it gives us access to paint all the way around the chassis legs on the inside. So we've got the new control arms fitted here, with new anti-roll bar drop links, new front control arm bushes, the brake pipes routed correctly, even the green fixing that doesn't seem to be shown on the catalogue that you can't seem to buy. We keep those, clean those and put those back because that's all period correct. And then the green cable for the brake pad wear sensor sits in on the left hand side front caliper nipple cover as well. Similar to the right hand side, we've got a mirrored image of everything on this angle. The only difference being we've got a xenon headlight level sensor system up here. So the bracketry gets replaced, or the drop link area. You can see the little boxes, the wiring boxes that we replaced as well. The gentle blending of overspray from the body colour velvet blue, how we believe the OEMs mimic that at the factory. You can see the wheel arch liner in the distance, which goes all the way around the back of the struts. Struts came to us pre-fitted, they were brand new, so they was less than 100 miles, so those were able to be reused. And then you've got the xenon rest of the system that was replaced as well. So new potentiometer, new zinced bracket, and even the bolts as well. And the tiny little M5 bolts here that go into the plastic of the potentiometer. There isn't really anything missed out. The tie rods came to us fitted, pre-fitted, but those were almost brand new. Again, probably the same age as the struts, so those were able to be reused. We've slightly diverted the drain output for the expansion tank, because normally that lives inside the sort of chassis leg wheel arch area and therefore puts any overflowing water into that metal area, whereas we like to poke them through so that at least it's only going to dump onto the floor and not onto any painted material area. So that is the finished effect, and we're absolutely delighted with the process and how this has come out. Such a iconic car having an iconic finish, which is going to last more than the test of time, and we really hope you've enjoyed watching this process just as much as we've enjoyed carrying out the work over these weeks. And thank you again for watching. If you've liked this, please do hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to see any further releases of this type of work, and we'll join you on the next video. Thank you for watching. That's the end of the repair now, and thank you very much if you've made it to the end of the video. We know these videos can be quite long, but we do like to provide a good amount of detail to show you what really goes into an underside restoration to a concourse and better than new standard. So that's the finishing work completed. That's the brake fluid change and bleed, the wheel alignment process, the 12-mile road test that we carry out as a minimum, and then also the exit clean by our detailing partner Bears Detailing. Please feel free to like and share the video, whether it be on forums, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere where you think somebody might enjoy watching this type of process. And of course, if you've got one of these cars yourselves or any BMW that you'd like an underside restoration carried out on, do please give us a call at Redish Motorsport. We're more than happy to talk through your options and get an appointment in the diary for you. So once again, thank you, and we'll see you on the next video.